I'm supposed to stay on.
Okay, I have started the recording, and I'll tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and do the introductions, and let's see if this thing's going to let me. Well, all right. Are you fellas seeing my slide, or did that not work?
I only see you in the train.
Uh-oh. Okay, so I have to go back to there. Okay, now why didn't that work? One participant at a time. Okay. Well, I'm gonna have to make that. Okay. Okay. So let's see if the host can. Yes, now I can. And welcome to Third Thursday History. We're doing this for the Southern Trails chapter of the Oregon-California Trails Association as a way of linking together a chapter that stretches from Arkansas through Texas, New Mexico, Arizona to Southern California. And when else can we get together? We cover an awful lot of trails from the Santa Fe to the Fort Smith Trail, which is the route of the Overland Mail, and the immigrant routes and the routes of the Jackass Mail, otherwise known as the San Antonio and San Diego Mail. So we are one huge chapter, which makes this hard to gather. We are, by the way, going to be gathering next week, Monday through Wednesday in Temecula. And I'll be talking at that time about a cattle drive that went from down this way at the Empire Ranch up to Temecula. If you are interested in joining the Southern Trails chapter, you go to the Oregon California Trails Association webpage, and that'll let you fill in, and they'll want you to become a member or family member, and then also to join Southern Trails. So it comes to $70 a year or $85 if you're bringing in the family. But you will get our semi-annual journal, Desert Tracks, which is an excellent journal with some seriously great articles. And there is the P.O. box for Oakley if you want to write directly to them, along with their link. But even simpler, if you need any of that stuff and didn't have time to write it down, you can email me at doug@doughawking.com. And hopefully that's pretty easy to remember, especially since you'll be looking at my name for part of the evening. doug@doughawking.com, and I'll send you everything you need. And when you become a member, you get not only Desert Tracks, but you get the Overland Journal as well. And that is another absolute beauty with really deep and well thought articles, mostly concentrating on the Oregon-California Trail, but occasionally they pick up one from down here too. So, and with that, I'll now introduce our speaker. And here we go. Chris Enss is a New York Times best-selling author, a scriptwriter and comedian who has written for television and film and performed on stage. She is currently the president of Western Writers of America and is the author of over 40 books on the West. Her passion is for telling stories of the men and women who shaped the history and mythology of the American West. Some of the most famous names in history. Whoop, I did it again. Not to mention film and popular culture populate her books. You can find her books in bookstores, on Amazon, at chrisenns.com. That's ends with 2 S's. And you can also find them on my website. Tonight, she'll be talking about iron women, the ladies who helped build the railroad. And with that, I will turn the floor over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Doug. I appreciate it. Thanks to all of you for allowing me to come and talk with you a little bit about women who helped build the railroad. It was a fascinating subject to research, and I'm anxious to share with you some of the great stories from the book. I've been writing about women of the American frontier for more than 28 years, I guess it's been. And I have, I'm on my 55th book right now. I've written largely about women of the American frontier, but I have also written about Roy Rogers and Dale Evans and John Wayne. And I've done a big picture book on Republic Pictures. And I just love everything about the American frontier and even the actors who portrayed people from the American frontier. But primarily I stick with writing about women of the West. And when you talk about women of the American frontier, usually people think they fall into 2 categories. They're either Miss Kitty from Dodge City or Laura Ingalls from Little House on the Prairie. People don't think that women did too much more in between there. But women really, they had filled a variety of roles in the American West. I've been able to write about Kate Warren, who was the first Pinkerton agent, first female Pinkerton agent, and working with Pinkerton on the Baltimore plot to kill Lincoln in 1861 on his way to his inauguration. And then I got an opportunity to write a book about women who entertained across the American frontier, including Laura Keene, who was the woman who was doing a show called Our American Cousin, in which President Lincoln, that night that the show went up, President Lincoln was killed at Ford's Theater during her program. And then from there, I wrote about it's called a book called No Place for a Woman, about the 19th Amendment crafted in 1871. And it's amazing how all of these things have in common things that took place on a railroad, women with railroad. I mean, Laura Keene was doing Our American Cousin, and she had taken the railroad to Ford's Theater. So from the West to Ford's Theater. So all these things it just seemed like a natural progression that I would be writing about women who contributed to the building of the American Railroad. Now I will show you, this is the cover of the book. It's called Iron Women, the Ladies Who Helped Build the Railroad. Wonderful picture there are these 2 ladies in front there. I don't really think that they did much with the railroad except right on the front like that. I just thought it was a great picture to put. But one of the when the Transcontinental Railroad met up at Promontory Point in 1869, they made a big point of taking some pictures of the event, but they made sure that no women were photographed. The women that I'm going to show you in this picture, you'll find some women there, but they were the wives of some of the railroad tycoons. But by and large, they didn't want women photographed at this major event because they said women did not have a hand in surveying any of the land or laying any of the track. So because of that, really, women they didn't allow women to be a part of it. But if women didn't come along after those 2 major events occurred, no one would have gotten on those trains to ride them because they were not aesthetically pleasing to begin with. Men would have been just happy to have people sit on a couple of boards, balanced between a couple of barrels. That would have been their idea of getting on board and going across country. But women came in, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what they did aesthetically. But at first, I will tell you that some of the earliest women in railroading could be found in telegraph stations. At first, it was said that women were not going to be allowed to even be telegraph operators. And the reasoning behind that was twofold. One, they said women couldn't multitask. So because they couldn't multitask, they weren't allowed to be telegraph operators. And 2, it was a very itinerant profession. you would be sent to very remote areas. And maybe you were there 9 months, maybe you were there 10 months, and then you moved on. And they didn't think that women would like doing that. First, when there weren't enough men to apply for these jobs as railroad telegraph operators, they opened it up to women. And one of the first things that they had women do is they had a number of telegraph machines going in one room. This is how they tested them. There'd be maybe 3 or 4 telegraph machines going, and the women had to tune in to their machine. And the job of the telegraph operator was to transfer information between train dispatcher and train operator. So the telegraph operator copied train orders and messages from the train crew and reported that information to the passing trains. And they also received and sent Western Union telegrams. So these women had to tune in to the one machine that was doing all this, even though there were other machines around, and they were able to do it. And able to put all that information down and really do a really good job of being able to make sure that let me show you a picture of great telegraph operators right there. I thought that was a really wonderful picture. These women had to be able to, like all telegraph operators, you had to be able to decipher this information by touch in the papers that would come out of the machine, because it was in Morse code. I'm sorry, it was the printed Morse code. And then they would have to be able to hear it and be able to translate it. It would come in Morse code. And these women were able to do that very well. Now, they made about $300 to $500 a year in the 1870s. So it wasn't a whole lot for them being in these remote places. That's the other thing I wanted to tell you. They didn't think women would like being in these remote places, but some of these women loved it, because they had a guy in every one of these depots that they would go and work at. They were quite promiscuous, and they liked that kind of life. One of the women that I write about in the book was married 7 times. Every place that she would go, she would meet somebody that would strike her fancy. She would divorce the guy from the last place and marry this new person. So, you know, I mean, some of these women they really did like that kind of lifestyle. When I was doing the research for it, I was telling Doug before we began the Zoom presentation here, I was telling him that late in the 1920s, early 1930s, one of the telegraph operators, a set of them, were talking about working with this particular gentleman who was a telegraph operator, but he wasn't very good. He brought his guitar with him everywhere, and he decided that what he wanted to do in the evenings was take his guitar to the different saloons, and then he would come back the next day and he'd be really too tired to do his job adequately. So they always had to come along beside him and help him to do his job. And that person turned out to be Gene Autry. Gene Autry, a great singing cowboy, terrible telegraph operator. So I thought that was just an interesting part of what they did. In addition to the women telegraph operators, you had wonderful women who invented things for the train. For example, you had Eliza Murphy, who focused on the mechanics of the railroad, and she created devices for improving the way bearings on the rail wheels attached the train cars and how they responded to the axles. And the device, or packing as it was referred to, was used to lubricate the axles and bearings. Murphy, the woman who came up with this, holds 16 patents for her 1870 invention, which I thought was just really amazing. In 1879, another woman inventor named Mary Elizabeth Walter developed a system that deflected emissions from the smokestacks on the railroad locomotives. She was awarded 2 patents for her pollution reduction device, which I thought, that's quite amazing, that women were very concerned about the black smoke that was being belched out across the beautiful West. And they really took control over that. I think one of my favorite stories about one of the inventors that I wrote about in the book is a cattle rancher's daughter by the name of Nancy Wilkerson. She was from Terre Haute, Indiana. And in 1881, the Humane Society put together this contest, this nationwide contest. And what it was, they were trying to get someone to come up with a cattle car that was going to be more humane to be able to get the cows from one part of the country to the next. Now, there was no problem with this prior to the invention of the train, because, you know, cowboys just they had cattle drives, so there was plenty to eat and drink along the way. But you now get these cows to Dodge City and you want to transport them to New York, and you do that by a cattle car. By the time the cows got to where they were going, they were emaciated, they were dehydrated. The price for the beef, then looking that way, it kind of decreased. And so, and the Humane Society was quite upset about the fact that these cows needed to be, you know, they were dying en route. And so they said, help us come up with a way to be able to create a better cattle car. And so this happened in 1881, and the prize was $500. And Nancy P. Wilkerson comes up with the cattle car, and she wins the prize. She, using a rack and pinion mechanism, she devised a sliding partition that separated the livestock from the food compartments and water troughs. So it was Nancy who comes up with this, and they still use a version of that rack and pinion device on cattle cars today. So women, you know, they weren't just telegraph operators. They were women who invented amazing things for the railroad. One of the women who they say did more, the railroad industry said she did more to promote rail travel than any other woman in the 19th century, was this lady here, and her name was Miriam Leslie. Now, Miriam Leslie was married to a guy by the name of Frank Leslie. And if you've ever been to any of the antique stores or done any kind of research, Frank Leslie had a newspaper called Frank Leslie's Illustrated Newspaper. Well, this is his wife. Miriam Leslie was quite flamboyant and had a great idea. She and Frank knew a lot of the railroad tycoons who were very upset about the fact that they had this great train rail system, but nobody would drive it. Nobody would ride it. They couldn't figure out what the holdup was. But Miriam Leslie said, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to have people create these amazing rail cars, a dining car, a sleeping car, and just for myself and a dozen other artists and poets and songwriters. And we are going to ride from New York all the way to San Francisco and back again. And we're going to make these stops along the way. And then the people are going to get out. These poets are going to get out, and they're going to write great poems about it. They're going to paint pictures about it. They're going to write songs about it. And we're going to be able just to promote it that way. So it was a 5-month journey to get from New York to San Francisco and back again, 5 months stopping along the way. When they do get back to New York, Miriam Leslie writes a book. The book is called, this is in 1877. She comes out with this book. It's called A Pleasure Trip from Gotham to the Golden Gate. And it's all about this 5-month journey with all these wonderful illustrations and paintings and songs and poetry about what took place across the West and during this trip. And everybody wanted to go. Everybody bought the book. The book was a huge seller. Everybody buys the book. And once they buy the book, then everybody wants to start traveling west. And that's exactly what happens. You have people making this mass, buying up all these tickets to travel west. So it's just like I said, they say that she did more for train travel in the 19th century than any other woman. So that was quite spectacular of Miriam to do. Frank Leslie dies not too terribly long after this particular event. And Miriam Leslie then takes over the newspaper. She was such an eccentric woman. She decides to change her name from Miriam to Frank and takes over the magazine. And so then now she's Frank Leslie. So no one has to say, I'm Mrs. Frank. Now she's just Frank Leslie. And it was never operating at a profit until Miriam came in and turned that newspaper around. And then suddenly it's operating at a profit. Another woman who took over her husband's business that that helped it to operate at a profit was a woman by the name of Sarah Kidder. Sarah Kidder becomes the first female president of a major railroad line. And Sarah Kidder was in Grass Valley. She was in the Nevada County area. I think you've got one of your folks online with you, Doug, that lived in Grass Valley for a while, that probably knows about Sarah Kidder. But Sarah Kidder's husband, John Kidder, owned a railroad called the Nevada County Narrow Gauge Railroad, or the Never Come, Never Go Railroad, because it just went into a loop. It went in a loop, and so they called it the Never Come, Never Go Railroad. And it went through a big portion of the Nevada County area and then some. And when John dies, he's the president of the Northern California rail line. And when he dies in 1900, she takes Sarah Kidder, who knows really nothing about the railroad except by watching her husband. She takes over the rail line. And in the 12 years she runs the railroad, she expands the line, builds bridges, and uses the rail line to help supply the state with supplies for a new dam. And during her reign, she managed to pay her stockholders healthy dividends, and that had never happened during her husband as he was running the line. It didn't happen. They called her particular run of the railroad as the golden years, because it just never happened. I want to show you a picture. I want to back up and talk a little bit more. And I mentioned Miriam. I passed over this amazing part here. This is one of the cars that Miriam, the interior of one of the cars that Miriam had created. And on that car, you see they've got china, they have gas lighting, they have crystal chandeliers. So the poor average guy, thinking that that's what he's going to ride the rails when he got on the trains, was hugely disappointed, because it wasn't anything like that. That it just kind of reminded me of traveling these days between coach and first class. The average guy getting on the train thinks that's what he was going to get on after reading Miriam Leslie's book, and that was not at all what it was like. One of the other ladies that helped railroad travel, advanced railroad travel, was a great actress by the name of Lily Langtree. And Lily Langtree had a special car designed for her. She traveled across the United States by train. She had a special railroad car created for her called the Lolly. And the Lolly was this amazing rail car that had, it was embossed throughout with gold, ornate fixtures, and she had lots of plants on the inside. She had a baby grand piano inside. She had chandeliers. She had velvet everywhere, green velvet, red velvet. It was just a spectacular car. And it was spectacular on the outside too. And when people heard that Lily Langtree was coming to town, they would go to the depot, not just to see Lily Langtree arrive, but to see the Lolly arrive. What made the Lolly so different was not just those other items that I told you about, but also the fact that there was a functioning bathroom on board. This is a wonderful picture of a woman in the restroom standing up, combing her hair. And that was important because they wanted people to see that you could walk around in there, that, you know, it wasn't just some tiny closet, that you could really get around, and that people wanted to see this fully functioning bathroom. You can imagine most people didn't even have indoor plumbing, but the Lolly was fixed with being able to go to the restroom, and it had a working sink, just all kinds of finery. That, by the way, is the same car that if the bears had not escaped, because, you know, why can't I remember his name? The gentleman that was the, I don't even know, I went down this road. He lived in Texas, and Judge Roy Bean. That's it. Ding, ding, ding. Judge Roy Bean. He left, when he died, he left Lily Langtree a bear that he had captured. I'm sure Lily Langtree was quite relieved when they tried to get the bear on the train, and when they unchained the bear got away from them and ran off. I'm sure she was quite relieved about that, because I don't know where she was going to put that bear on her beautiful car anyway. But that if she had the bear would have been on that particular and probably just tore up the entire train. But these women, outside of the people like Miriam Leslie and Lily Langtree, you had some women that did helped advance rail travel quite a bit. And some of those women were the Harvey Gals. Here's a great picture of the Harvey Gals at one of the depots along the way. This was something that was Fred Harvey had come up with this. He decided that it would be really great if there was a depot and a restaurant at each one of these depots that served the same kind of food, no matter where you went, same recipes. So you could be in Cleveland, Ohio, and in Tucson, Arizona, and be served the same kind of food. It was based on the same recipes. And it would make people feel at home. Prior to Fred Harvey being able to do this and have the Harvey Girls come and be a mainstay at each one of these places, when trains stopped and they would get out to try and find a place to eat, maybe these places, the cafes or the saloons would be so far away by the time you got your food, and you would have missed your train. So Fred Harvey came up with this idea for these depots, and the Harvey Girls were instrumental in making that all work. I mean, they would sign contracts to be a Harvey Girl that would be either a 6-month, 9-month, or a year-long contract. And many of these women signed these contracts to be Harvey Girls and go to these remote locations because they were saving money to go to school. And so they were anxious to be able to be, and they came west. Some of them came west too, hoping to find a husband, although it was strictly forbidden when you signed a contract with the Harvey Company that's not what you would do. That's not what you would do. You would not fraternize with any of the patrons of the restaurants. But many of these women did do that, and they had happy marriages. But by and large, these women took these jobs so they could have money to be able to get to school, which I thought was quite one of the things that happened with the Harvey Girls is they branched out after World War I. Train travel slowed down quite a bit. And so the Harvey Company then, because Fred Harvey had passed away, so the Harvey Company came up with an idea that was known as the Harvey Courier Girls, which is you could go to the Southwest, you could go to the Grand Canyon, get on train, go to the Grand Canyon, and you could get off the train and be met by these Harvey Courier Girls who would then load you into these fancy station wagons, and they would take you to some remote locations in the Southwest that you couldn't get to by train. And then they would take you back to the train and you can get on and then you can go back home, or you could go around the Grand Canyon if you wanted to. It was a woman who helped design a lot, if not the most of the Harvey depots and hotels. And that woman was a woman by the name of Mary Coulter. So wonderful picture of Mary Coulter here. Mary Coulter was an artist and an architect and went to art school in Philadelphia. And Fred Harvey hired her to help design the depots and the restaurants. And she was quite good at what she did and was very versatile, because if you were at Union Station in Kansas City, you could see how it's all marbles and pillars. And she could do that kind of work. And she could also then spend a lot of time in the Southwest designing interiors for depots like this with the hotels. This is from the La Posa Hotel in the Southwest. And you can see the inspiration came from a lot of the Southwestern architecture that she saw there. And she goes on then to help out again with the railroad and designing things for the Grand Canyon. If you've been to the Grand Canyon, you've seen things like the Hopi House or some of the lookout areas there that seem to just be designed by rock. It just kind of happened by nature. But that was Mary Coulter's brilliance. She designed these structures to make it look like a part of the landscape and that it just happened. She designed the retreat or the hotel at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. So if you go all the way down to this beautiful retreat hotel down there, and she designed that. And she was just an amazing woman and did all of this work for the Harvey Company. A lot of people don't know that it was a woman that did that. One of my favorite stories in the book that I had an opportunity to be able to research was a woman by the name of Dr. Mary Pennington. Here's a picture of Dr. Pennington. And Dr. Mary Pennington invented what we know, she invented the modern day refrigerator boxcar. She was a scientist and worked with a lot of molds and funguses. So wanted to figure out how you could transport produce and meat from one part of the country to the next. Had it not been for her invention, we would not have been as successful in World War I, because we were able to furnish a lot of our military posts with produce and meat because of her invention. It got there without being spoiled. And then not only does Mary Pennington do that, but we have a lady by the name of Olive Dennis, who worked for the Baltimore, Ohio Railroad, who invented incandescent lighting above the seats. She invented the recirculatory air process for the trains. She invented special, maybe I mentioned the lighting. She invented the lighting, the seats, the reclining seats. She just came in and made rail travel much more comfortable, and help create and invent the indoor plumbing, or the plumbing on board the trains, so there could be bathrooms there. So just to be able to help it be aesthetically pleasing. She also came up with a line of china, which I was fortunate enough to get a piece of Olive Dennis's china that they had aboard the trains. I mean, she just was, I mean, you could go from being able to invent, like I said, the whole system for recirculatory air, but then come up with your fine china that would be served in all the dining cars on the train. So just these women just were so creative in many areas. But, you know, not only did women influence the railroad in a positive way, but they also influenced the railroad in a negative way. And I want to talk about those gals too. Sometimes they are a little bit more exciting than inventing the refrigerator car. One of the ladies I want to talk about was Laura Bullion. She was in the 1890s. She's a member of the Butch Cassidy Wild Bunch gang, and her cohorts were fellow outlaws, including Sundance Kid, Blackjack Ketchum, and Kid Curry. For several years in the 1890s, she was romantically involved with an outlaw by the name of Ben Kilpatrick. He was known as the Tall Texan. And he was a bank and train robber and an acquaintance of Laura's father, who had also been an outlaw. So Laura was in company that she felt comfortable with. Bullion was arrested in early November 1901 in St. Louis, Missouri. She was convicted of robbery and sentenced to 5 years in prison for her role in the Great Northern Train Robbery. She would often she would help Kilpatrick on his train robberies by dressing like a man. First, she would get on board the train dressed as a woman. Then she would go off and, you know, kind of peel off those garments where she would just come out as a man then, and have a gun with her. And this is a drawing. I like this particular drawing. This was an artist rendering of her holding up one of the stages, getting into the engineering room and getting the engineer to stop the train so everybody else could get on board and help rob it. She was either doing that, or sometimes she would dress as a man and she would be the one that had the getaway horses waiting for the guys. But either way, she was a culprit in this. You know, that's really where the first TSA kind of thing started, because prior to that, but prior to Laura Bullion's behavior, women could get on board a train and their purses not be searched. But because Laura Bullion carried a gun with her and had to, and that's what she used to pull the gun out to be able to rob the train. Now they said, no, 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 no. Everybody, all the women will have their bags looked at. Show us if you got a weapon on you. So that was really the first TSA kind of security. But Laura Bullion is released from the Missouri State Penitentiary at Jefferson City, Missouri on September 19th, 1905, after serving 3 years and 10 months for her punishment for what she did. She moved to Memphis, Tennessee in 1980, posing as a war widow and using an assumed name. She supported herself as a householder and seamstress, and later as a drapery maker. Her fortunes declined in the late 1940s when she was without an occupation, and she dies in 1961. This is what I think is fascinating, because that's when I was born. She dies in 1961 of heart disease at the Shelby County Hospital in Memphis. Her resting place is at a Memorial Park Cemetery in Memphis. Even when she got out of prison, she was waiting for Kilpatrick for a while. He gets out of prison and he goes right back into robbing trains. And that's when she said, no, I'm not doing that anymore. Thank you very much. And that's when she goes off to Memphis to become a seamstress. And this is also one of the ladies that helped, that was instrumental with the railroad. This was a well-known prostitute. She was Julia Bulay. She was from Virginia City, Nevada. That's where she worked. And she supported the fire department there. And you can see that fire helmet in the back, and she's wearing a belt there in that tiny, teeny, tiny little waist. She's wearing a belt buckle that had the fire department emblem on it. She supported the fire department, not only monetarily, but also she would ride the train with them as they would go down in canyons and help put out the fires that were started in different mining camps. And when she was murdered, they named the car after her. So you can go to Virginia City now and still see the Julia Bulay car at the depot. They've reassembled it and it's been refurbished. It was later used in a couple of Bonanza episodes. Where I think one of the episodes where little Joe was he was engaged to Lily Langtree, of all things, in one of the episodes. So women did amazing things. I had a great time working on this particular book and learning about what women did. And those are just a few of the women, but the book is chock full of all kinds of things that women did to influence the railroad. Does anybody have any questions? Doug, I don't know if you open it up for questions or what happens now. I'll leave that to you.
Okay, yes, we can open it up for questions. And I wanted to comment. I think you answered a question for me, something I've been wondering about. Your telegrapher ladies.
Yes.
You remember the shootout that Lieutenant Harry Wheeler was in Benson in 1908?
Okay.
There was a woman somehow associated with the trains who seemed to have a decent job of some kind, was coming down through Vale with her brand new husband and ran into a gentleman who claimed to be her husband at the train station.
Oh, wow. Well, okay. Well, that's as it, we always attribute that kind of behavior to men. It's amazing how many women like that kind of behavior when they were telegraph operators.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. So there you go.
So if you've got questions, you can unmute yourselves down in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. There's a line through your thing, looks like a microphone. If you click on that, that will unmute you. So does anybody have a question?
Just out of curiosity, how many people are on right now? How many people are, do we know?
We've had 10 on tonight. I know that there's a couple that couldn't make it tonight that want to listen to the recording. So.
Okay.
Yeah, not so much a question, but a lot of stories just in that short time that are really interesting. I had never heard of the Lali carriage, and I had to guess how to spell it. But you know, there's a restaurant in Sloane Street in London, which is named the Lali Restaurant, which is based on the Lily Langtree car.
Well, there you go. Well, you know, she was from England.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it looks like a really fine restaurant. I've got it up on my other screen here.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But that you know, that provokes really a number of those stories I'd like to follow through, and I must read the book and follow through on the stories to learn a little more about the things you've been talking about.
It's very sad that they let the car was parked in Chicago, and it never left Chicago when she went back to England, and it just fell to ruin. And that's unfortunate that they just let it go, because it was, you know, it was a spectacular car. It'd be wonderful if somebody could recreate that.
Fascinating range of different stories.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, you know, when you go from for every Laura Bullion, there was a woman like Dr. Mary Pennington. One of the pictures in the book is Dr. Pennington on top of one of the cars, testing out, as the car is going, testing out, you know, the spores and fungus, and trying to make sure that everything is right. Just a fascinating lady.
Well, it's an age when we don't think of women inventing anything.
Yeah, and you know, also, and I've included in the book the number of patents that this particular woman holds for the railroad crossing guards. It was a woman that came up with that.
Wow.
Yeah, women were, you know, and I don't think it was. You just really have to dig to find out what these women did do. And I enjoyed that. I'm a licensed private investigator, so I love the deep dive. There's a picture in the book too of women that worked in the machine shops at the railroads, and they're wearing bib overalls, and they had a number of washers of different sizes, and they were so good at it, they could be across the room and flip those washers to end up on each one of these little different poles with the sizes, so they could be across. So it's one of the pictures in the book. There's women just doing that, just flipping them around. Very
Wow.
good. Anybody have any questions about women from the American frontier that they wanted to ask about?
I was wondering, were any women involved in any of the holdups and the robberies that were legendary on the railroads?
Well, I don't know necessarily. Well, yeah, I guess legendary. The great Northern train robbery, Laura Bullion, who I was just talking about, she was instrumental in that. Yeah, yeah, quite a few. I mean, you know, if you wanted to, especially in the early 1900s when these trains were being robbed, you know, at that particular time, the Pinkertons knew exactly what was going on, and a lot of Pinkertons agents were on board these trains. So to be able to really trip any of the Pinkerton agents on, you would never suspect a woman was going to be someone that was going to rob the train. So it was really a good cover.
What about mail car attendants, you know, sorting the mail on the railroad in the early days? Any stories about women doing that?
I didn't come across anything about women doing that, but I probably could have if I dived into it. I just wanted, you know, you're limited to how many stories you can put in the book. And so when I was going on, I tried to get a representative sampling of everything, from the good to the bad.
You're going to hold up your book so we can see it?
Sure. That's a good idea.
Ah, okay.
Iron Women. Yeah. These ladies were quite amazing. I mean, some of the stories of the telegraph operators who, you know, you wouldn't think about. One of the telegraph operators was working in, I think this was somewhere in the Midwest, somewhere in Kansas. she's sitting and working. She's got the window open, watching a storm. And lightning came in and struck her because she's right next to all this equipment. So
Doug, you're gonna have her book at Temecula?
Well, I'll have a way for you to acquire it if you like through my website.
yeah, you
Or
can go
through
on my
Chris's.
website. Yeah, you can go to Doug at DougHawking.com, or you can go to ChrisEnss.com and order it through there. It's always good if you go on Amazon and order it through there too, because that makes it look like somebody, that makes it look good to Amazon. And so they'll keep it in Amazon, you know? So.
Yeah,
It was
You
an
guys-
excellent presentation.
Well, thank-
David Miller, really, really good. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you. And
Very much.
well, thanks, Doug.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for being with us. I really appreciate it. I think this may be one of our most successful. Sue, nod your head if it is.
Yep.
Sue's happy.
Oh, good. Good. I'm glad. I've got a new book coming out in June called The Widowed Ones, Beyond the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And it's about the 7 officers' wives who lost their husbands at the last stand, and the friendship that they had, and how the media was chasing them and hounding them to find out what they knew about the Little Bighorn, where they were going to live, who they were going to marry, how much money they got. I mean, you know, and this was 1876, and you wouldn't think that was going on. But the media, I mean, it's just about how they met the people that they were married to, what happened to them after, what happened to these ladies afterwards and their children. And it's a fascinating read.
Good.
You've got a lot of fascinating books out there. You've recently done According to Kate,
Right.
Big Nose Kate, and you've done the Pinks about
Right.
the Lady Pinkertons, and what Death Row All Stars about
Yeah.
the baseball team that got to play as long as they won and had their execution stayed until they started
Yeah.
to lose.
Right.
Well, go ahead.
Absolutely
mention some-
fascinating story. Yeah. Happened in 1911. Who would have known that, you know, that as long as I mean, and these guys were good too that played baseball, but as long as they played baseball and won, they got stays of execution. And you tell that and people go, what? That's impossible. But it happened.
You know, I really love the way you have dug out some of these lesser known stories of people. And I'm going to have to pick up some of the books.
Well, I always enjoy doing that. I like to be able to find, even when I'm tasked with writing about somebody that's well known. For example, I wrote a book called The Trials of Annie Oakley. And I didn't want to write the same story about Annie Oakley being a part of the Buffalo Bill Cody show because everybody knows that. So The Trials of Annie Oakley is about the 6 years that she spent in court suing William Randolph Hearst for defamation of character. You know, it's a fascinating story. In the early 1900s, a story came out that Annie Oakley, that the headline of all 55 of Hearst's newspapers read, America's sweetheart arrested for stealing pants and buying drugs. And really, what it was a prostitute in Chicago by the name of Annie Oakley, A-N-Y Oakley. She was the culprit, but she was drunk when they arrested her and took her in for her to be arraigned. And people started teasing her, saying, Annie Oakley, tell us about Buffalo Bill Cody. And then she did, because she was drunk and just made up stuff. And so the next day, that's what the newspapers said. But Annie Oakley asked Hearst to have his newspapers retract the story, and he refused because they were selling out. And so she said, all right, I'm going to take you to court. And she takes each one of those newspapers. He owned 55 newspapers. She takes them all to court. She wins 54 out of the 55 cases. She wins as much as $1,000 and as little as a dime. But it was the principle of the matter.
Mhm.
The 55th newspaper, that gentleman, the editor of that newspaper, retracted the story and apologized, and he was fired. So really, she won across the board. But prior to Annie Oakley doing that, we now have class action suits because of Annie Oakley. There were no class action lawsuits prior to that. So that's what I'm talking about. I mean, just a fascinating story that people wouldn't really know. You wouldn't associate that with Annie Oakley. All right, that's enough of me. I'll stop talking now.
Again,
I have one more
Thanks.
One more
thanks
question.
again for being with us.
One more question. Hello?
Chris, we've got one more question.
Okay,
Oh,
I hope I can answer it.
As a Custer buff and a little Bighorn fan, when is your book coming out? I look forward to it.
June 1, and it's chock full of things that no one has ever seen before. The review from Kirkus Review said the scholarly material in this text or in this book is astonishing.
Well, I do
So
look forward to that, and usually you only hear about Libby afterward.
yeah, well, you'll hear about Maggie Calhoun. You'll hear about Annie Yates. You'll hear about them all.
Yeah, all widows.
Yeah, you'll hear about Grace Harrington, whose husband Henry Harrington is the only one listed as missing in action.
Yeah.
Did you cover any of the women, the Indian women?
I did not. Nowadays, if you do that, you're accused of cultural appropriation. So as my publisher announced to me when my new editor took over a couple of years ago, I'm too white to write any other kind of history. So that's what's going on nowadays. Now I'm being punished because I'm white.
What
So-
a world it is.
Yeah. So can't go outside of that. Although I wrote this book that I'm extremely proud of called Moke's War, which is about the Cheyenne woman who survived the Sand Creek Massacre and what she goes on to do. And I'm incredibly proud of that book, even though I'm a white gal, daring to write about a Native American.
Okay. Well, thanks again, and
Thanks.
I'll go ahead and stop the recording. And Chris, take care, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.